A plantation owner put his twin daughters on a schedule and forced an enslaved carpenter to follow it. Or face being sold downriver. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, all written down in ink, cold as iron, in the master's own hand. But when one sister fell in love with a man trapped in her father's twisted plan, she made a promise that could destroy them all. Now, with a betrayal from within the family, a preacher carrying dangerous evidence, and a sail set for dawn at the river docks, their only hope lies in a few scraps of paper and one sister's courage to stand against her own blood. Will the truth set them free before the chains drag them away forever? Or will the schedule claim them all? The manor clock struck 4, its brass chime rolling out across the fields like a command no living soul could ignore. The sound drifted over the cotton rows, past the lumber shed, down to the quarters where smoke rose thin from cook. Every hand knew that chime. It meant the day's shape had changed. Time to gather tools, time to line up for evening count, time to move according to someone else's measure. Horace Bellamy stood at his study window and watched the yard shift. Workers crossed from barn to quarters in lines he could predict. He liked prediction. He liked knowing that, when the clock said 4, the world answered. His ledgers sat open behind him, columns filled with names, tasks, bushels, hours, everything in its place, everything accounted for. He was a tall man, lean in the way of people who never missed a meal, but never lingered over one either. His coat was always buttoned. His cuffs were always clean. He kept his hair trimmed short and his beard shaped to a point. Order was a kind of religion for him, and the plantation was his congregation. The twins came down the main stairs just as the clock finished its 4th note. Celia first, then Vera, identical, in face and frame, dark curls pinned back, blue calico dresses sewn from the same bolt of cloth, but anyone who lived in that house knew the difference. Celia moved like water, quiet and steady. Vera moved like a door on a hinge, precise but waiting for someone to push. Horace turned from the window. "Girls." "Yes, Papa." Celia's voice first. "Supper at 6. Tell Minnie to set the table for 5. Reverend Price is joining us." Vera nodded and went toward the kitchen hall. Celia lingered, her eyes on the ledger spread across the desk. "Something you need?" Horace asked. "No, sir." But she didn't move. Horace closed the ledger and set his pen down in the groove worn smooth by years of the same motion. He studied his daughter. She had her mother's eyes gray and clear, but her mother had been easy to read. Celia was not. "Go on, then." She went. Horace returned to the window. Below, a man crossed the yard, carrying a toolbox. Elias, the hired carpenter, owned by a widow the parish is over who rented him out for skilled work. He was known for 2 things. He could build a staircase that wouldn't creak, and he could read. The reading made some folks uneasy. Horace didn't mind it. A man who could read plans was a man who didn't waste lumber. Elias set the toolbox down near the back porch and wiped his brow with a rag. He wore a plain shirt and trousers mended at the knee. His hands were broad, scarred along the knuckles from years of wood and iron. He worked without hurry, without waste. Horace appreciated that. The clock ticked on. The sun slanted lower. The house settled into its evening rhythm, every soul moving to the time Horace Bellamy kept. Morning came with light that filled the manor hall like water, filling a jar slow, even, golden. The smell of cornbread drifted from the kitchen. Minnie was already at the stove, her hands quick and steady as she flipped cakes on the iron griddle. She was older than most in the house, her hair more gray than black, her back bent just enough to show the years, but her eyes were sharp. She saw everything. Celia came down the stairs with a book tucked under her arm. She paused at the landing, listening. The house was quiet except for the creak of Minnie's spatula and the faint scrape of a hammer somewhere above. Elias was working on the upper landing. The stair rail had come loose when it met the newel post, and Horace wanted it fixed before someone leaned too hard and went through. Celia climbed slowly, her footsteps soft on the runner. He didn't look up right away. He was setting a screw. His head bent, the line of his jaw tight with concentration. Celia stopped a few steps below and waited. Finally, he glanced over. Morning, Miss... Morning. She held out the book. I'm done with this one. You said you might want it. He wiped his hands on his trousers and took the book carefully. It was a small volume, the cover worn smooth. Essays on natural philosophy. He turned it over, nodded. Much obliged. It's dry in places, Celia said. But the part about light and reflection, I thought you'd find it useful. For angles, when you're building... Elias looked at her then. Really looked, not the quick, careful glance a man gave when he knew eyes were on him, but something slower. Something that held a question he didn't ask. I'll read it, he said. Celia nodded. She should have gone. She knew she should have gone. But her hand stayed on the rail, and his stayed on the book, and the silence between them felt like something solid. Footsteps on the stairs below. Light. Quick. Vera appeared on the landing, her face calm, her hands folded. Papa wants to know if the rail is finished. Elias straightened. Near enough. Another hour. Vera's eyes moved from her sister to Elias and back again. She said nothing. She didn't need to. The look was enough. Celia stepped back. I'll leave you to it. She went down the stairs, passing Vera without a word. Vera stayed where she was, watching Elias work. He didn't look up again. When he finally packed his tools and headed for the back door, Celia was at the hall window. Their eyes met, for just a heartbeat too long to be nothing, too brief to be proof. Elias pocketed the book and walked out into the yard. The sun was climbing. The day was already warm. The funeral reception filled the manor with voices and the smell of ham and pickled beets. Mrs. Croft had passed at 83, and half the parish had come to pay respects. The house was crowded, every room full of black crepe and murmured condolences. Horace moved through the gathering with practiced ease, shaking hands, nodding, listening. Celia stood near the parlor window, a cup of tea cooling in her hands. She wasn't good at this small talk. Sympathetic smiles, the careful dance of grief that wasn't really grief. She scanned the room and found Vera near the fireplace, speaking softly to the minister's wife. Vera was better at it. She always had been. Celia set the cup down and slipped into the side hall. It was quieter here, the noise from the parlor muffled by thick walls. She leaned against the wainscoting and closed her eyes. You all right? Miss G opened her eyes. Elias stood a few paces away, a broken chair leg in one hand. He must have been called in to fix something during the gathering. I'm fine, Celia said. Just needed air. He nodded, didn't move. She shouldn't have stayed, she knew that. But the house was loud and full, and here, in the dim hallway, the world felt smaller, safer. The book, she said. Did you get to the part about mirrors? I did. What did you think? Elias glanced toward the parlor, then back. I think a man could spend his whole life reflecting light for someone else and never see his own face. Celia's breath caught. It wasn't the answer she'd expected. It wasn't an answer about physics at all. Before she could reply, footsteps echoed from the main hall. Horace appeared at the end of the corridor, his face calm but his eyes sharp. Elias! The chair? Yes, sir. Just finishing. Horace's gaze shifted to Celia. Your sister is looking for you. I'll go find her. But Horace didn't move. He stood in the doorway, blocking the light, watching. Elias picked up the chair leg and walked past him without a word. Celia smoothed her skirt and followed. Horace stood alone in the hallway for a long moment. Then he turned and walked back to his study. He closed the door. He opened the top drawer of his desk and pulled out a leather-bound calendar, the kind with ruled lines and dates, printed in black ink. He sat. He stared at the empty page. The house hummed around hymn voices, footsteps, the clink of silverware. But in the study, the only sound was the scratch of his pen as he began to write. Night settled over the plantation like a blanket pulled tight. The guests had gone. The house was quiet again. Minnie was in the kitchen, washing the last of the dishes. Celia and Vera were upstairs. Horace was in his study, the lamp burning low. The calendar lay open on the desk. The ink was still wet. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, daughter, a Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, daughter, B, Sunday, no mistakes. Horace read the words again. They looked clean, orderly, reasonable. Even, he told himself, it was a solution. A way to contain what could not be allowed to spread. A way to control outcomes before they spiraled beyond reach. He pressed the blotter down, black and final. The clock on the mantel ticked. The house creaked. Somewhere in the quarters, a dog barked once and fell silent. Horace closed the calendar and slid it back into the drawer. He would speak to Elias in the morning. It would be a simple conversation. Calm, clear. A man like Elias would understand the terms. A man like Elias had no choice but to understand. Horace extinguished the lamp and climbed the stairs. The house was dark. The world outside was darker still. But the calendar remained, locked in the drawer, its pages waiting. Morning light came pale and cold through the study window. Horace sat behind his desk, the calendar open in front of him. Elias stood near the door, his cap in his hands. "You sent for me, sir." "I did." Horace gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit." Elias didn't sit. He stayed where he was, his eyes on the desk, the calendar, the neat rows of Horace's handwriting. Horace leaned back. "You're a smart man, Elias. Literate. Capable. I've been pleased with your work here. Thank you, sir. I'm going to ask something of you, something that requires discretion." Elias said nothing. Horace turned the calendar so it faced him. "My daughters are at an age where attention must be managed. Carefully. You understand?" "I'm not sure I do, sir." Horace's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. "There's been talk. I won't have talk, so I'm implementing a schedule, an arrangement. Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays you will attend to daughter A. Tuesdays, Thursdays, Saturdays, you rest. No exceptions, no mistakes." The room was silent. Elias's hands tightened on the brim of his cap. "This is housekeeping," Horace said. "Nothing more. You do your work. You follow the schedule. Everyone is clear on expectations. There's no scandal, no confusion." Elias looked at the calendar, then at Horace. His face was stone. "And if I say no," it was a thin, patient smile. "You won't say no." The clock ticked. The room waited. "You're a hired man," Horace continued. "Your contract can be ended. Your owner can be notified of misconduct. You can be sent downriver, where your skills are wasted and your name is forgotten." Or he tapped the calendar. "You can follow a simple schedule and keep your position. Keep your reputation. Keep what little freedom you have." Elias stared at the paper. He memorized the shape of Horace's handwriting, the angle of the lamp, the sound of the clock. He memorized the way the light fell on the desk and the way the keys sat in the drawer lock. "Do we have an understanding?" Horace asked. Elias's voice came low and steady. "Yes, sir." "Good. You start Monday." Elias turned and walked to the door. His hand was on the knob when Horace spoke again. "Elias," he stopped. "This is kindness," Horace said. "Believe that." Elias left without answering. The door closed softly behind him. The calendar stayed open on the desk, its lines sharp and black, its meaning clear. Horace pressed the blotter down one more time. The ink was dry now, set, permanent. The house moved on. The clock kept time. And the schedule, written in Horace Bellamy's careful hand, began to govern lives that had no say in their own days. Celia found the calendar page that evening. She had gone to her father's study looking for a book, something to fill the hours, something to quiet her mind. The drawer wasn't locked. The page lay on top, face up, the ink dark against cream paper. She read it once. Then again, the words didn't change. Her hands went cold. The room tilted. She gripped the edge of the desk and tried to breathe, but the air felt thick, wrong. The letters blurred and sharpened. Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Daughter A she was, daughter A. She had always been off the firstborn, the first name, the first to everything. The study door opened. Vera stepped in, a shawl around her shoulders. "What are you doing in here?" Celia couldn't speak. She pointed at the page. Vera crossed the room and looked down. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then her breath came out in a slow, controlled exhale. You knew, Celia whispered. I didn't. Liar Vera's face flushed. I didn't know about this. She tapped the page. But I knew. Papa was watching. I knew he'd seen you two in the hall. Celia's voice broke. He's made us into... She couldn't finish. Vera picked up the page, her fingers careful, almost reverent. He's made us into a solution. That's what he does. He solves problems. This isn't a solution. This is control. Vera set the page down. It's what he knows. Celia stared at her sister. They had shared a room their whole lives. Shared clothes, shared lessons, shared every birthday and Christmas and Sunday sermon. But right now, standing in their father's study with that page between them, they felt like strangers. You could stop this, Celia said. You could go to him. Tell him it's wrong. Vera laughed, but it was a hollow sound. And say what? That is wicked. That is vile. He'd smile and pat my hand and tell me I don't understand the world. Then he'd lock that drawer and go right on scheduling us, like we're livestock. So you'll just accept it? Vera's eyes hardened. No, I'll use it. Celia stepped back. What? You've been the favorite your whole life, Celia. The smart one. The gentle one. The one Papa listens to. Vera's voice was quiet, but there was something raw beneath it. This schedule, this is the first time I've ever had something you didn't. 3 days to your 4, maybe. But 3 days where I matter. Where I'm not just the second girl. The backup daughter. Celia felt the floor drop beneath her. You can't mean that. I don't know what I mean. Vera's hands trembled as she folded the page and set it back in the drawer. But I know I'm tired of being invisible. She turned and left. Celia stood alone in the study, the lamp burning low, the clock ticking its steady, merciless rhythm. She wanted to tear the page to pieces. She wanted to scream, but she did neither. She closed the drawer. She walked upstairs. She lay in her bed and stared at the ceiling while Vera breathed softly across the room, pretending to sleep. Neither of them spoke. The page remained in the drawer, untorn, waiting. Monday morning came too soon. The house moved through its routines: breakfast, prayers, the division of tasks. Horace left for the fields. Vera went to the parlor with her needlework. Celia stood at the top of the stairs, her hands gripping the rail. Elias was in the carpenter shed. She could see him through the window, sorting tools, his movements slow and deliberate. He didn't look up. She descended the stairs, crossed the yard. Her feet felt like lead. He heard her coming and straightened. His face was unreadable. Miss Celia? Don't, she said. Don't call me that. Not today. He set down the chisel he'd been sharpening. What do you want me to call you? Nothing. I don't want any of this. Neither do I. They stood in the doorway of the shed, the sun warm on their backs, the smell of sawdust and oil thick in the air. Celia's throat ached. I didn't know he would do this, she said. I know. I would stop it if I could. Elias looked at her then. Really, Luke? Would you? The question hung between them. Celia wanted to say yes. She wanted to believe it, but she didn't know how to stop her father. She didn't know how to tear down a system built brick by brick over generations. She was 18 years old, and the world was vast and cruel and indifferent. I don't know how, she whispered. Elias nodded. Then we survive it. That's all we can do. He turned back to his work. Celia stayed in the doorway, watching his hands move over the wood steady, precise, patient. She wanted to say something else, something that would undo the schedule, something that would make the world smaller and kinder. But no words came. She left him there and walked back to the house. The day stretched ahead, long and hollow. Monday became Tuesday. Tuesday became Wednesday. The schedule governed them all. Minnie saw everything. That was her job, to see and to clean and to keep the house running smooth as butter on warm bread. She dusted the study every morning, emptied the ash from the fireplace, wiped down the desk, and she noticed when the calendar drawer didn't close all the way, when pages were crumpled and smoothed again, when ink smeared where a hand had pressed too hard. She didn't say anything. Not to Horace. Not to the girls. Not even to Elias, though she saw the way he walked slower on certain days, the way his shoulders sagged when the clock struck 8, and the house settled into silence. But Minnie was old enough to know that paper could speak louder than voices. She had seen it before: bills of sale, freedom paper, letters that decided fates. So when she found a torn corner of ledger page near the wastebasket, she folded it small and tucked it into her apron pocket. Then another, then another. She didn't have a plan yet. She just knew that ink on paper was evidence, and evidence in the right hands could shift the ground beneath a man's feet. On Thursday afternoon, she found a full page in the trash Horissa's handwriting, neat and deliberate, outlining the schedule in detail. He must have written a draft before settling on the final version. Minnie smoothed it flat and hid it beneath the lining of her apron. That evening, after the dishes were done and the fires banked, she sat in her small room and laid the scraps out on her cot. They didn't tell the whole story, but they told enough. She folded them back into the apron and blew out her candle. The darkness settled. Outside, the night sounds: rose crickets, a distant owl, the creak of the quarters settling into sleep. Minnie closed her eyes and prayed, not for deliverance, not yet, just for steadiness, for sharp eyes and steady hands, and the patience to wait for the right moment. Because moments came. They always did. You just had to be ready when they arrived. Sunday morning broke clear and bright. The yard filled with the sound of wagons and voices as folks gathered for the traveling revival. Reverend Amos Price was known throughout the parish chateau, broad-shouldered man with a voice that could shake rafters and a heart soft enough to hear what wasn't said. He arrived on horseback, his saddlebags heavy with him, books, and a worn Bible. Horace greeted him at the porch, shook his hand, and led him inside for coffee before the service. Elias stood near the barn, watching. The schedule said Sunday was rest. No mistakes. But rest didn't feel like rest when the weight of the week sat heavy on his chest. Amos emerged from the house and walked toward the chapel, a simple structure with benches and a pulpit, open to enslaved and free alike. Elias followed at a distance. The service began with singing. Voices rose, strong and clear, shaking the air. Amos led them through Amazing Grace, then Come Thou Fount, his voice booming over the congregation. But when he reached for the next hymn book, his hand paused. There was a slip of paper tucked in the spine. He pulled it free, glanced down, and kept singing. His face didn't change. His voice didn't falter. But his eyes found Elias in the back row, and something passed between them. After the service, Amos stood at the door, shaking hands, blessing babies, clapping shoulders. When Elias passed, Amos gripped his hand and held it a moment longer than necessary. "Stay a bit," he said quietly. "I'd like a word." Elias waited by the chapel while the crowd thinned. Minnie appeared from the house, carrying a basket of leftover cornbread. She met Amos's eyes across the yard and gave a single, slight nod. When the yard was finally empty, Amos walked to the edge of the trees where Elias stood. Minnie followed, her basket over her arm. "Tell me," Amos said. Elias told him. Not everything, just enough. The schedule, the drawer, the way the house felt like a trap with walls that closed tighter every day. Amos listened without interrupting. When Elias finished, the Reverend pulled the slip of paper from his pocket and read it again. Then he looked at Minnie. "You got more of this?" She nodded and reached into her apron. She handed him the scrap-torn ledger corners, the draft schedule, a page with Horace's signature and date. Amos studied them, his jaw tight. "This is coercion, plain as day." "It's also legal," Minnie said. "Leastways, the law won't see it different. Law and rightness ain't always the same thing." Amos folded the papers carefully and tucked them into his Bible. But paper can stall a man. It can make him think twice. It can put questions in the air that demand answers. Elias's voice was rough. "What are you saying?" Amos looked at him. "I'm saying I know a clerk. County man, cautious but fair. He doesn't like scandal, but he likes abuse even less. If I bring him this, he might delay a sale, might give us time." "Time for what?" "Time to get you gone before Horace finds another way to lock you down." The words settled like stones. Elias wanted to believe them, but belief felt dangerous. "He'll come after me," Elias said. "Maybe. But a man can only chase so far if the law's asking questions." Minnie touched Elias's arm. You Trust Reverend Price. I've seen you in service. You listen when he talks. So, Lisa now. Elias looked at the scraps of paper, then at the two people standing before him, one old, one strong, both willing to risk more than they should for someone who wasn't kin, wasn't free, wasn't anything but another soul in need. All right, he said. What do we do? Amos smiled, slow and steady. We wait. We watch. And when the moment comes, we move fast. The three of them stood beneath the trees, the chapel quiet behind them, the house watching from across the yard. Somewhere inside, Horace Bellamy sat at his desk, confident in his control, certain of his order, but the ink on those scraps was his own, and it would speak against him when the time came. Sunday evening fell soft and warm. Celia walked to the chapel after supper, needing space, needing air. The building was empty, the benches still smelling faintly of polish and sweat and song. She sat in the back row and stared at the simple wooden cross above the pulpit. She had prayed here all her life. She had sung hymns and listened to sermons and believed, mostly, that God was good and just and present. Now she wasn't sure what she believed. Footsteps on the chapel steps. She turned. Elias stood in the doorway, hesitant. I can go, he said. No! Stay. He came in and sat to rows ahead. Not close, not far. The distance felt careful, respectful. I spoke to Reverend Price, Elias said. Celia's heart jumped. What did you tell him? Enough. He's going to help. Minichu. Tears pricked her eyes. She blinked them back. How? I don't know yet. But if there's any chance at all, I'll take it. Celia stood and moved to his row. She sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. If you run, she said, I'll come with you. Elias turned to her, his eyes Ouija. You don't know what you're saying? I do. You'd lose everything. Your name, your home. Your father would hunt us both. Let him. Her voice was fierce, shaken. I'd rather lose everything than live like this. I'd rather be no one, nowhere, than be owned by a schedule. Elias reached for her hand, their fingers laced together, warm and steady. If we do this, he said, there's no turning back. I know. They sat in the quiet chapel, holding hands, the cross watching over them, the night settling around the plantation like a held breath. Neither of them saw Vera in the trees outside. A hand pressed to her mouth, her heart breaking and twisting and hardening all at once. Vera walked back to the house slowly, her feet finding the path by memory rather than sight. The moon was thin, the night heavy, with a smell of jasmine and river water. Her chest felt tight, like something inside was being squeezed smaller and smaller until it might disappear entirely. She had heard every word. The promise, the plan, the reckless, impossible hope that her sister and Elias could somehow slip free of the world that held them. She should have been angry. She should have felt betrayed, but what she felt was worse. She felt left behind. The house loomed ahead, lamp-like, glowing in her father's study. Vera paused at the bottom of the porch steps, her hand on the rail. She could go to her room. She could say nothing. She could let Celia and Elias chase their fragile dream and watch it shatter from a distance. Or she could speak. She could tell her father what she'd heard and secure her place. The daughter who stayed, the daughter who could be trusted, the daughter who mattered. Her feet carried her to the study door before she decided. She knocked. Come. Horace sat at his desk, a ledger open, a pen in his hand. He looked up, his face calm, expectant. Vera, what is it? She stepped inside and closed the door. The words came out before she could stop them. There's talk of running. Horace set the pen down carefully. Running, Celia and Elias. I heard them. At the chapel. The room went very still. Horace leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, something cold and calculating. What exactly did you hear? Vera told him. Not everything, just enough to make him act. When she finished, Horace nodded slowly. Thank you. You did right to tell me. Vera waited for relief, for satisfaction, for the warm glow of being chosen, being valued. But all she felt was hollow. "What will you do?" she asked. Horace stood and walked to the window. Outside, the quarters were dark, the field silent. "I'll do what's necessary. I'll protect this family. I'll stop scandal before it starts. Papa, go to bed. Vera, this doesn't concern you anymore." She opened her mouth to argue, to take it back to undo what she'd just set in motion. But Horace had already turned away, his hand reaching for the bell that would summon the overseer. Vera left the study and climbed the stairs. Celia's bed was empty. She was still at the chapel, still making plans, still believing in escape. Vera sat on her own bed and pressed her palms to her eyes. She had wanted to matter. She had wanted her father to see her, to value her, to need her. Now she did, and it felt like ash. The pounding on the door came before dawn. Elias woke, two rough hands, and lamplights, and the overseer's voice, barking orders. They dragged him from his cot in the carpenter's shed and shoved him into the yard. Horace stood on the porch, fully dressed despite the hour, his face carved from stone. "Elias," he said, "you've been accused of plotting insurrection, of encouraging others to flee, of violating the trust placed in you." Elias's mind raced. Insurrection. The word was a death sentence. It didn't matter if it was true. It only mattered that it was said. "I've done no such thing," Elias said, his voice steady despite the fear crawling up his spine. "The evidence suggests otherwise." Horace descended the steps. "I've arranged for your sale. You'll be taken downriver within the week. It's for the best. For everyone." The word was worse than insurrection. Downriver meant sugar plantations where men died in a year. Downriver meant disappearing into a system so vast and brutal that even names were forgotten. "You can't." The overseer struck him across the jaw. Elias tasted blood. "Lock him in the shed," Horace said. "Post a man outside. No visitors." They dragged Elias back and shoved him inside. The door slammed. A bolt slid home. Darkness swallowed him. He sat on the dirt floor, his head ringing, his jaw throbbing. He could hear voices outside the overseer giving orders, footsteps moving away. Then silence. Elias leaned back against the wall and closed his eyes. He counted his breaths, counted the hours until dawn, counted the days he might have left. He thought of Celia. He hoped she would forgive him for failing, for not being strong enough or fast enough or smart enough to outrun a system built to crush men like him. The darkness pressed in. The shed smelled of wood and oil and sweat. Elias pressed his forehead to his knees and waited for morning. Celia woke to Minnie, shaking her shoulder. The old woman's face was tight with worry. "Miss Celia, you need to get up." "What's wrong, Elias?" "They took him in the night. Your father's selling him downriver." The words hit like a fist. Celia threw off the covers and stood, her hands shaking. "Where is he?" "Locked in the shed. Your father's posted a guard. I have to see him." Minnie gripped her arm. "You can't. Not now. Your father is watching." "He knows." "Celia." Someone told him. Celia's gaze snapped to Vera's bed. It was empty, the covers thrown back. "Where's Vera?" "Downstairs, with your father." Celia felt the world tilt. She wanted to scream. She wanted to tear the house apart. But Minnie's hand on her arm kept her grounded. "What do I do?" Celia whispered. "You stay quiet. You stay out of sight. And you let Reverend Price do what he can." "What can he do?" "Papa's already decided." Minnie's voice dropped. "Paper can delay a sale. And delay can become escape if the timing's right. But you have to trust. You have to wait." Celia wanted to argue. She wanted to run to the shed, to her father, to anyone who would listen. But Minnie's eyes were fierce and steady. And Celia knew the old woman had survived decades in this world by knowing when to move and when to hold still. "All right," Celia said. "I'll wait." But her heart was breaking, and the day stretched ahead like a prison. Horace appeared at breakfast.com and composed. He ate his eggs and drank his coffee and spoke to Vera about the weather and the garden as if nothing had happened. Celia sat across from him, her hands clenched in her lap. She couldn't eat, couldn't speak. She just stared at her father and tried to understand how a man could be so cruel and so certain all at once. "Celia," Horace said, "I've made arrangements for you to visit the Harrisons next week. Their son, Thomas, is interested in making your acquaintance? I'm not interested in Thomas Harrison. You will be. Horace set down his fork. This unfortunate business with Elias has reminded me that you need proper guidance, proper company. A respectable marriage will settle things. I don't want to be settled. Horace's voice hardened. What you want is irrelevant. You're my daughter, and you'll do as you're told. Vera looked down at her plate, her Fosse Polly. Celia Studi. May I be excused? Sit down. No. The word hung in the air. Horace stared at his daughter, and for the first time, something like uncertainty flickered in his eyes. Celia turned and walked out. She climbed the stairs to her room and locked the door. She sat on the bed and stared at the wall, her chest heaving, her mind racing. Outside, the world moved on. The sun climbed. The plantation hummed. And in the carpenter's shed, Elias counted the hours until he would be loaded onto a wagon and carried away. Minnie found Reverend Amos at the edge of the property that afternoon. She handed him the calendar page and the ledger scraps without a word. Amos studied them, his jaw tight. This is enough to raise questions. But questions ain't freedom. It's enough to stall, Minnie said. And stalling might be all we get. Where's he taking Elias? River Town. Trader named Cobb. Sail set for dawn. Tomorrow. Amos folded the papers carefully and tucked them into his coat. I'll ride to the county clerk. Man named Halle. He's cautious, but he's got a conscience buried under all that caution. If I can get him to delay the paperwork, it buys us time. Time for what? Time to move Elias before Horace can regroup. There's a network, folks, who help, but it's slow, and it's dangerous, and it only works if the law's distracted. Minnie nodded. Then go. Fast as you can. Amos swung onto his horse. Pray! Minnie prayed the Clucks got more courage than fear. He rode hard toward the river town. The papers pressed against his chest, the sun sinking low behind him. The wagon came at dusk. Elias was pulled from the shed, his wrists bound, his face bruised from the night before. They loaded him into the bed alongside crates of tools and sacks of grain. The trader, a thick-shouldered man named Cobb, checked the bindings and grunted his approval. Horace stood on the porch, watching. Celia appeared at the door, flanked by Minnie. Horace raised a hand. Let us say goodbye, supervised. Celia walked to the wagon, her legs shaking. She looked up at Elias, and her heart broke all over again. I'm sorry, she whispered. Don't be. His voice was rough but steady. You got nothing to be sorry for. I should have fought harder. I should have. You can't fight a house built on chains, Celia. You just survive it. Tears streamed down her face. She reached up, and their fingers touched briefly before the overseer stepped between them. That's enough. Celia stepped back. Vera stood at the edge of the yard, half hidden in shadow, her face twisted with something between guilt and grief. The wagon rolled forward. Elias didn't look back. He kept his eyes on the road ahead, memorizing the bend of the river, the shape of the trees, the placement of the stars. The journey was slow. The road was rutted, and the night was thick. By the time they reached the river town, the moon was high, and the docks were quiet. Cobb tied the wagon near the trader's office and stretched. We'll finish the paperwork at dawn. You sleep here? Elias lay in the wagon bed and listened to the river slap against the pilings. He thought of Celia. He thought of the scraps of paper Minnie had saved. He thought of Reverend Price riding hard through the night. And he prayed, not for a miracle, just for one more sunrise, one more chance. Amos reached the county clerk's office just before midnight. Mr. Halle lived above the office, and Amos pounded on the door until a lamp flickered to life inside. Halle appeared, bleary-eyed and irritated. Reverend Price, what in blazes I need? 5 minutes. Then you can throw me out if you want. Halle sighed and opened the door. Amos stepped inside and spread the papers on the desk, the calendar, the ledger scraps, the draft schedule in Horace Bellamy's own hand. Halle read slowly, his frown deepening. When he finished, he looked up. This is coercion. Yes, sir. It's also not technically legal. Bellamy owns those girls. He can arrange their lives however he sees fit. He doesn't own Elias. And forcing a man into this arrangement under threat of sale, that's another matter. Halle rubbed his eyes. What do you want me to do? Delay the sale. Long enough for questions to be asked. Long enough for Elias to be moved out of Cobb's hands. And if Bellamy comes after me, he might, but you'll have the law on your side. You'll have documentation. You'll have evidence of coercion. That's more than most men have when they stand up to power. Halle stared at the papers for a long time. Finally, he nodded. I can stall the paperwork. Say there's a discrepancy. Say I need to verify ownership. It'll buy you a day. Maybe two. That's all I need. Halle reached for his coat. Then, let's go. Before I lose my nerve. They rode together to the docks. The night air cool and sharp. The trader's office was dark, but Halle pounded on the door until Cobb emerged, cursing. What's this about? Halle pulled out the ledger scraps. There's a question about the sale scheduled for dawn. I need to verify some documents before it proceeds. Cobb's face darkened. The hell you do. Bellamy's already paid half. Then he'll get his money back once the paperwork clears. Until then, the sale is delayed. You can't. Hale's voice turned cold. I can. And I am. Take it up with the magistrate if you've got complaints. Cobb spat and slammed the door. Halle turned to Amos. You've got until tomorrow night? After that, I can't hold him. That's enough. Thank you. Halle nodded and rode back toward town. Amos stood on the dock, the river moving dark and slow beneath him, the stars burning overhead. One day, one chance. It would have to be enough. Dawn broke over the river town, pully and cold. The docks creaked with the weight of boats and crates. Traders moved along the waterfront, their voices sharp in the morning air. Steam hissed from a paddle-wheeler, tied at the far pier. Elias sat in the wagon, his wrists still bound, watching the light change. He had counted the hours, counted the sounds, the river, the boots on wood, the rattle of chains from other wagons. He knew this was the day his life would narrow to nothing or break open into something he couldn't yet see. Cobb emerged from the office, his face dark with anger. He crossed to the wagon and yanked Elias to his feet. Change your plans. Clerks holding up the sale. Says there's paperwork issues. Elias's heart jumped, but he kept his face still. What kind of issues? None of your damn business. Cobb shoved him back down. But you ain't going nowhere until it's settled. So sit and keep your mouth shut. The trader stalked away, muttering curses. Elias leaned against the wagon side and allowed himself one slow breath of hope. Minutes later, hoofbeats sounded on the road. Horace Bellamy rode into the yard, his face carved from stone. He dismounted and strode toward Cobb's office without a word. Elias watched him disappear inside. Voices was Horace's, cold and clipped. Cobb's rough, undefensive. The argument lasted only minutes before Horace emerged and crossed directly to the wagon. This delay is temporary, Horace said, his voice low and steady. You'll be sold. If not today, then tomorrow. If not here, then somewhere worse. Do you understand? Elias met his eyes. I understand you're afraid. Horace's jaw tightened. Afraid of what? That a few scraps of paper might undo everything you've built. For a moment, something flickered in Horace's face. Not fear, exactly, but something close. Uncertainty. Then it vanished, replaced by the cold certainty Elias had seen in the study. You're nothing, Horace said. You'll always be nothing. And when you're gone, this will all settle back into order. He turned and walked away, but the delay held. The sale didn't proceed. And as the sun climbed higher, Elias felt the fragile thread of possibility strengthen just a little. At the plantation, Celia paced her room like a caged animal. Minnie had brought word of the irreverent price, had reached the clerk. The paperwork was stalled. Elias was still at the docks, but not yet sold. It wasn't freedom, but it was time. Vera appeared in the doorway, her face pale and drawn. Celia, don't. Celia's voice was sharp. Don't say a word to me. I didn't know he'd. You told him. You told Papa. And now Elias is chained in a wagon waiting to be sold downriver. So don't tell me you didn't know. Vera's hands twisted together. I was angry. I was tired of being invisible. I thought, her voice broke, I thought if I mattered to Papa, it would feel different. But it doesn't. It feels worse. Celia stared at her sister, the mirror image, the other half. All their lives they'd been compared, measured, set against each other, and now the distance between them felt like a chasm too wide to cross. You can't undo what you did, Celia said quietly, but you can help fix it. How? Reverend Price bought time, but Papa will find a way around it. I always does, unless someone testifies, unless someone who knows the truth stands up and says it out loud. Vera's breath caught. You want me to speak against Papa? I want you to tell the truth. Vera turned away, her shoulders shaking. He'll never forgive me. I know, Celia's voice softened to fraction, but maybe you'll forgive yourself. Vera stood in the doorway for a long moment, caught between the father who would never see her and the sister who was asking her to burn down everything she'd hoped for. Finally, she nodded. All right, I'll do it. That afternoon, tension crackled through the docks like lightning before a storm. A crowd had gathered, traders, clerks, townspeople drawn by the whispers of scandal. Mr. Hawley stood on the steps of the county office, the ledger scraps in his hand. He's fussy grim. Horace Bellamy stood below, flanked by his lawyer, his posture rigid with controlled fury. This is absurd, Horace said. The sale was arranged legally. The delay is groundless. Hawley raised the calendar page. This schedule written in your hand outlines a coercive arrangement involving your daughters and an enslaved man. It raises questions about the nature of his sale and whether it constitutes retaliation for resistance to abuse. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Horace's lawyer stepped forward. That document is private household correspondence. It has no bearing on a legitimate sale. It has bearing on motive, Hawley said. And motive matters when a man's freedom or lack thereof is at stake. The argument swirled, legal terms and counter-arguments filling the air. Elias sat in the wagon, watching, his heart pounding. The delay was holding, but barely. Then hoofbeats sounded on the road. A wagon rolled into the yard, and Vera Bellamy climbed down, Minnie beside her. The crowd fell silent. Horace turned, his face going white. Vera, what are you doing here? Vera walked forward, her hands trembling, but her voice steady. I came to tell the truth. Vera stood before the crowd, her father's eyes boring into her like nails. She wanted to run. She wanted to disappear. But Celia's words echoed in her mind. Tell the truth. My father created a schedule, Vera said, her voice cutting across the yard. A schedule that forced Elias into relations with me and my sister under threat of sale if he refused. It's written in Papa's hand. The dates match. The ink match. I saw the calendar myself. Horace stepped toward her. Vera, you don't know what you're saying. You're confused. I'm not confused. Vera's voice rose. I know what I saw. I know what happened. And I know you threatened Elias with sale the moment you thought he might resist. This isn't about insurrection. It's about control. It's about covering up what you did. The crowd erupted in whispers. Hawley raised his hand for silence. Can you verify the details? He asked Vera. The dates? The handwriting? Yes, sir. Monday, Wednesday, Friday for daughter of that's Celia. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday for daughter, but that's me. Sundays were marked no mistakes. The ink was black, applied with Papa's fountain pen. I saw him write it. Horace's lawyer tried to interrupt, but the damage was done. Vera had given testimony tailed, specific, damning, and she was Horace Bellamy's own daughter. Hawley turned to Horace. Do you deny these allegations? Horace's face was a mask of fury and disbelief. This is a family matter, a private. It stopped being private the moment you threatened a man with sale to enforce it. Haley said, I'm ordering Elias moved to county, holding pending further review. The sale is suspended indefinitely. Cobb exploded in protest. Horace's lawyer argued procedure, but Hala stood firm, the ledger scraps and Vera's testimony giving him the legal ground he needed. Two deputies stepped forward and unlocked Elias's chains. They led him away from Cobb's wagon toward the county building. Elias's legs shook. but he walked steady, his eyes finding Vera's across the crowd. She nodded once. He nodded back. It wasn't freedom, but it was the first step. That night, Minnie and Reverend Amos met in the quarters, their voices low. "County holding won't last long," Amos said. "Horace will find another angle, another judge, another way to get him sold. Then we move him before that happens," Minnie said. "Tonight, if we can. It'll be slow, dangerous. The routes are watched. Slow and dangerous beats sold downriver." Amos nodded. "I've got a wagon, a driver I trust. First stop is a farmhouse 20 miles north, Quaker family. Sympathetic. From there, its stages could take weeks, maybe months. Can we get him out of county holding?" Amos smiled grimly. "Leave that to me." He rode to the county building and spoke quietly with a night deputy man who owed him favors from years of ministry. Money changed hands. Keys turned, and just after midnight, Elias walked out of the holding cell and into the back of a covered wagon. Minnie was waiting with blankets and cornbread wrapped in cloth. "You eat, you rest. You don't make a sound until you're past the patrol line." Elias gripped her hand. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you're free." The wagon rolled out into the darkness, moving slow and careful along back roads. Amos drove, his eyes scanning for lanterns, for riders, for anything that would force them to stop. They passed the first patrol just before dawn, hidden in a stand of brush while horses moved past on the main road. Then they took the longer route, winding through farms and forests, avoiding towns. By the time the sun rose, they were beyond the immediate danger. But the journey had only just begun. At the plantation, Horace Bellamy locked himself in his study. The ledgers sat open, but he couldn't focus on the columns. His world was unraveling, thread by thread. His daughter had testified against him. The county had intervened. Elias was gone, not sold, not controlled, just gone. And the whispers had already started. He could hear them in town, in church, in every conversation that stopped when he entered a room. Celia appeared at the study door. She didn't knock. "I'm leaving," she said. Horace looked up. "No, you're not." "Yes, I am. I'm refusing the marriage you arranged. I'm refusing to stay in this house. I'm surrendering any claim to inheritance or property. And I'm leaving. You'll have nothing. I'll have myself." Horace stood, his hands flat on the desk. "You're a fool. You'll regret this." "Maybe. But I'll regret it as a free woman, not as your daughter." She turned to go, then paused. "Vera's staying. She wants to make things right. She tried to protect Minnie and the others from whatever you do next. That's more than you deserve." She left. The door closed softly behind her. Horace sat alone in the study. The clock ticked. The house creaked. Outside, the plantation moved through its rhythms, planting, harvesting, the endless cycle of labor and control. But the calendar was gone. The schedule was broken. And Horace Bellamy, for the first time in his ordered life, didn't know what came next. Weeks passed. Elias moved north in careful stages farmhouse to cellar to barn loft. The network was vast and patient, built on whispers and trust. Reverend Amos carried the papers separately, ensuring that if Elias was caught, there would be no evidence linking him to anyone who helped. The journey was slow. Some nights, they traveled only 5 miles. Other nights, they stayed hidden for days while patrols passed. Elias learned to move in silence, to sleep in daylight, to trust people whose faces he would never see again. Finally, after many weeks of hidden days and slow travel, he reached a modest church community in a free state. The pastor was an old man with kind eyes and a quiet voice. "You're safe here," he said. For now, Elias stood in the small church and felt the weight lift, just a little. He wasn't free, not truly. The law could still reach him. Bounty hunters could still come. But for the first time in months, he could breathe without counting the cost. He found work as a carpenter. He rented a small room above a stable. He wrote careful letters that traveled back south through trusted hands, letting people know he was alive. He was safe. He was waiting. Winter came. Snow fell soft and steady over the Free State town. Elias stood at his window and watched the world turn white. A knock at the door. He opened it. Celia stood on the threshold, a single bag at her feet, her face thin but her eyes bright. "I came by lawful means," she said. "I surrendered everything. I have nothing but what I carry." Elias pulled her inside, his hands shaking. "You shouldn't have." "I should have." "I did." They stood together in the small room, the fire crackling, the snow falling outside. It wasn't the ending they'd imagined, grand or triumphant. It was small and quiet and hard one, but it was theirs. Spring arrived slowly. The snow melted. Green returned to the fields. Celia found work, sewing. Elias built furniture. They lived simply, carefully, always watching for shadows. A letter came in late spring, delivered by a traveling preacher. Vera's handwriting, careful and small. "Papa is diminished. The scrutiny has cost him. I remain at the house. I used what influence I have to shield Minnie and the others. I cannot undo what was done, but I try each day to do less harm. I think of you often. I hope you have found what you were seeking." Celia folded the letter and set it on the table. She didn't know if she would ever forgive her sister fully, but she understood the weight of staying, of trying to mend what could never be truly whole. She reached for a plain household calendar hanging on the wall. It had no names, no schedules, no ownership, just days marked with simple notes. Market, church, visit Mrs. Cole. She picked up a pencil and circled Sunday. "What Sunday?" Elias asked. "Nothing special, just a day that belongs to us." He smiled. She smiled back. And in that small room, with winter behind them and summer ahead, they built a life from fragments careful, quiet, and entirely their own. Outside, the world moved on. Rivers flowed. Clocks ticked, systems ground forward, indifferent and vast. But in one small house, in a free state town, two people who had been reduced to schedules and properties sat together in lamplight and chose their own time. And that, in its own small way, was victory.